Hello and welcome to an episode of Risk Talks, recorded especially for Risk Awareness Week 2020. Today I'm privileged to be joined by three Chief Risk Officers to talk about the route to CRO, which is a discussion about the routes that our Chief Risk Officers have taken and advice for those that are looking to follow in their footsteps. My name is Edward James. I'm the founding director of RCQ Associates, the risk, credit and quantitative recruitment specialists. Today, I'm joined by Demetria O'Sullivan. Demetria is the ex-Chief Risk Officer for Euronext Life and ICE. She was previously a global head of risk for futures and clearing at Citi and is an ex-executive director at JP Morgan. She's got significant experience working as advisor to boards and executive teams. Next up, we have Alex Henson. He's the Chief Risk Officer for Argo Group, where he's been since 2015, and he's recently taken leadership for sustainability and ESG programs. Prior to Argo Group, he was the CRO for Amlin in Switzerland and a head of enterprise risk management at Aon Global Risk Consulting. He's got an engineering background and is a previous chairman of the Institute of Risk Management. And last but not least, we have Mehtap Numanoglu Tassiopoulos. Mehtap is the Chief Risk Officer for Brown Brothers Harriman in Luxembourg, London and Zurich. She's got 24 years experience in risk and is a co-chair of the cybersecurity working group for the Luxembourg Fund Association. Welcome all. So to start with, please can you give me a brief introduction to your background and how you became Chief Risk Officer? So if I can start with Demetria first, that would be great to hear your story, Demetria.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So my interest in how I got to be Chief Risk Officer, I always had a love for math. I studied actuarial mathematics at university, but after 9 months as a trainee actuary, I found myself thinking that I didn't want to find out if my models worked after I died. I'd rather look at models and see if they work on a day-to-day or a week-to-week basis. So I left the actuarial world and found myself moving to London. My first role was at Barclays Capital as a risk analyst on the repo desk. Wasn't the most interesting roles that I had, and I very quickly moved on to the commodities desk, which I found much more interesting. And a lot of my life in finance has been on commodities related to either commodity financing, building risk platforms, and building out teams. I moved from being an analyst onto a brokerage desk, and I spent a very brief time broking metals on the LME, but also found that sales wasn't my natural pitch, and went from risk management to leading futures and options teams at Citi and JP, as you mentioned. And then through there, I was on the risk committees of several of the clearinghouses. I chaired the Eurex Risk Committee for 4 years, and through that built out quite a good network. And I would say that being involved in risk committees is a really important part of not just doing your job, but actually broadening your network and your teams. And through that, I was asked to become the Chief Risk Officer for Life Euronext, and my journey continued into various other Chief Risk Officer roles.
Great, thank you. Alex, please do share your story.
Sure. So I'm originally a chemical engineer, so it's not an obvious route to Chief Risk Officer. I started at a company called ICI, which no longer exists, but I found my way through various engineering production management roles into the risk function of AstraZeneca at the time, which was mostly an insurance buying activity, but became an ERM focus. And it was around the time of the Turnbull report, and this finance director needed somebody to pull all the different strands of risk reporting together. And I drew the short straw, so I did that and moved on to I took a personal risk and set a risk consultancy up within Aon because I was in danger of becoming the world's ERM expert in pharmaceuticals, which probably had limited kind of future. I did 4 or 5 years of leading projects for major corporations, mostly non-financial services in Aon, right across the globe, because business came into London and built the team up. And then I got tempted to go to Amlin PLC in 2009 because, strangely enough, it looked like Solvency II would be an interesting thing to do. That my view on that changed over time, I have to say. But so I set up all the risk governance for Pillar 2 and the model validation, and then Solvency II was halted. So I took a role in Switzerland as the Chief Risk Officer of Amlin AG, covering risk compliance and legal. It was very interesting. It was $1 billion company because it was reinsurance, but it only had 100 staff. So it was a little bit like running a hedge fund. It also had a Bermuda footprint. So that was a lot of regulatory exposure. And then I moved to Argo Group, as you said, in 2015 to be the group CRO, looking after risk and compliance. And that's shifted around a bit. I now look after risk, capital modeling, and sustainability.
Thank you, Alex. That's really interesting. So we've got an actuarial background, an engineering background, and Mehtap, it would be great to hear a bit about your story.
Thank you very much, Edward, and thank you for this great, I think, introduction and event. And also, I'm very pleased to hear that all of us have different backgrounds. I studied international relations. After like the first 2 years, I realized that probably I would be better suited to do something that I can challenge the things if I don't believe in, etc. So I started to take courses from economics and business management, and I started my career in audit. After some years, I moved to risk management. I have worked in various global organizations in different countries. I'm originally from Turkey, so I started in a Turkish bank, and I moved to HSBC Turkey, who had both back then a local bank, and then I moved to London to work in the city and Canary Wharf. In London, I worked in various organizations, including Barclays and Lloyds Banking Group. And since 2009, I moved to Luxembourg, and I have been working in Brown Brothers Harriman. And I love risk, and that's why after some years in internal audit, I changed banks, I changed also countries, but I love being in risk. And I'm currently the Chief Risk Officer of BBH Luxembourg, London, and Zurich, as you say. I think my love and passion for risk is not only limited to the job. I like also writing about risk, and I have been writing some articles about it. I love talking about it. So I have trained many people worldwide about risk management. And also, I do some risk-related initiatives in the industry, including the one that you mentioned. I'm the co-chair of the Cybersecurity Committee in a Luxembourg Fund Association here.
Great, thank you. So I think we've got three really interesting and probably diverse backgrounds in terms of institutions as well as the routes that you've all taken. So I'd be interested to share with the audience and people who are viewing this, what skills do you think are needed to become a Chief Risk Officer? And I guess I'll divert that first to Alex.
Sure. So I think the first one is to be inquisitive or even nosy. You got to know your business and the challenges, and so you got to just be interested in learning and in people. So I think that's pretty important. The second one is occasionally you have to be brave. You have to call things out that people don't necessarily want to talk about. but you have to do it in a way that is acceptable to the culture. So that is quite tricky. And I'd say you also need to be a team player. So you need to work with people as opposed to kind of against them, with the view to, I think everybody will buy in if you're trying to improve things. And finally, you have to be resourceful because not everybody will knock on your door. You have to go and find the information.
Great, thank you. So Meta, what are your thoughts on that side of things?
I wouldn't repeat the obvious skills such as having analytical skills and having the necessary technical expertise and project management skills, etc. I think these are the things that we all know. If I might add a couple of them to the ones that mentioned already by Alex, I would say having intellectual curiosity and being passionate about continuous learning, because the risk management is never boring. There are always new things to learn, new risks. Like I think the recent 3, 4, 6 months showed us that there are always new risks that is threatening the world, the organizations. So being passionate about continuous learning and having intellectual curiosity, in my mind, is very important. I think also, in addition to all this, because things are changing, we are living in a digital world, and there are lots of new things that are coming. Adopting yourself to the new situations and learning about the new risk types is also very important. And I think excelling in presenting the very complex matters in such a way that your message is tailored for your audience. Your audience might be bored, your audience might be someone junior. So really getting very complex matters and presenting them in a way that everyone can understand is an important skill, I would say.
Great, perfect, thank you. So yeah, some common themes we're seeing here. I think I'll touch later on the learning and training because I think that's a really interesting point. But Demetria, please, what skills do you think are needed to become a Chief Risk Officer?
Well, I think my thunder's been slightly stolen in that I think it is a common message that we all seem to have, but I think communication broadly is really, really important. To echo what Meta said, I quite often with my teams describe, if you can't explain it to your grandmother, then you need to go again. It has to be grandmother friendly. And quite often we work with people who are very quantitative, no question about that, but they can't translate that message to their audience. So that's, I think communication broadly is important from your juniors right up to your board and your exec. I think nosy was a great way of Alex describing what you need to be. The other way I look at that is ensuring you pick up every rock and you really look under what's under the rock. People sometimes are afraid to look under rocks because they know there's something not nice down there, but not having a fear of uncovering that rock, seeing what's under there. And then, as Alex also said, being brave and calling it out, but in a collaborative way. I think when I started out in risk management was seen as police. No one wanted to deal with you. And so being able to get your message across in a collaborative way so that people understand that you're not a barrier to doing business, you're actually a business enabler. And I think risk management has evolved a little bit along those lines over the last few years, seeing risk as an enabler to business rather than business prevention.
Thanks so much, Demetria. I'm really happy about you sharing some similar themes because I guess it shows that we can all have different backgrounds and even be at different companies and different lines of business, but actually the same pressing issues is irrespective of the type of company that you're at. I guess you've got the commercial side of things from a CEO in a business to the risk side of things to check how things are. But in terms of advice, what advice would you give to others looking to follow in your footsteps? And I guess I'll direct that first to Mehtap if you're happy to share.
Sure. I think my first advice would be acting outside your comfort zone. And this comfort zone can be entering into the new industries, new areas, new subjects, new risk types, new products and departments. So I believe risk management, the basics in risk management are transferable between countries, between areas, between industries. Then you are learning more and more and becoming specialized in a topic. So acting outside comfort zone, like everyone, is very important for a CRO, I guess. Also, without repeating the skills we mentioned about continuous learning and intellectual curiosity, I find also very important participating in the industry activities or in the risk management professional organizations, because like this, you are keeping yourself up to date about the industry, about the risks in your industry, and also about the risk management profession. I'm a great believer in specialization. On the one hand, we should be able to communicate with all departments. We shouldn't be working in silos, but I think we should, there are so many increasingly new risk types that, I mean, we can try also to be specialized in some of them. And I think, especially in this age, it is really being agile and getting familiar with all the new technologies, trying to understand digitalization and the related risks that it brings, but also thinking as a strategist across the teams and across different geographies to be an enabler rather than being a disruptive force. It would be my my advices to the risk professionals, or to the ones who wants to enter in the risk profession.
Thanks, Maysa. That's great. I'm really a big passionate advocate of sharing ideas and going to industry conferences. You know, that's how we all share, we all learn, and that side of things. So, Dimitria, please, what advice would you give to others looking to follow your footsteps?
I think risk management's changed a lot over the last 20, 25 years. I think having quantitative skills is a given, but I think particularly over the last 10, 12 years, as Maysa said, you know, being on top of evolving risks, I think regulatory risk management has come to the fore in many, many industries. So again, that harks back to communication. Can you communicate to your regulators? Can you communicate to all of your stakeholders, both internal and external? So communication to me is key. And I think that resilience to continue peeling away at the onion until you get to the center is also very important. I do also think that the poacher turned gamekeeper can often make a very good risk manager, because you know which rocks to look under first. If you've been in the front line, you know, as a second line individual, which rocks are the most important, and the ability to look at a vast amount of data, but condense it quite quickly, and the ability to see that data and say, well, this is the area I really need to focus on. I think that's important. And as we said earlier, collaboration is quite important, ensuring that what we describe as our first line team are not afraid to knock on the door if they find something, because as a risk manager, you can't uncover every rock, but having that trust and relationship, so that they're not fearful to come to you, that they know you will work closely with them to resolve whatever that issue is. I think that's quite important.
Thanks, Dimitria. Some lovely points you mentioned there. Some similar ones, but I guess also different. Investigative mindset is so often that comes up. So, Alex, what advice would you give to others looking to become a chief risk officer?
Sure. Well, a lot of it's been covered. Obviously, build your network is a key one. Those connections are very important. Knowing who to ask when you get stuck, which will be often. I would actually mention get a good qualification in risk. I think many people fell into risk. It's their second profession. There are more people now coming through who have chosen this profession. So they may have an MSc, they may have a qualification. There are probably too many institutes out there, but GARP or Premier or Institute of Risk Management are obvious ones. But that gives you a baseline on, what you're talking about. It could be that your first profession is accounting or actuarial, so that helps, but broaden that out. In London, quite a few people have a Chartered Institute of Insurance in the insurance industry. So it just depends on your original background. And then I would say get a very broad experience and don't specialize too soon. So there's a lot of people who go very deep into operational risk or market risk or reserves or catastrophe risk modeling in what I do, and they become the expert in that, and they're not perceived as CRO material. So I think get that broad experience.
Okay, that's really good actually, because I often see people going to, I guess, some of Dimitri's old stomping grounds, say JP and Citi. The larger the bank, obviously, the smaller the cog you are in the big machine. And you see a lot of people specialising quite early. And there's pros and cons to that, but I definitely agree. From my advice, I think having a broader base and skill set is really good, and also risk as a discipline. It's maturing. I focused on it 15 years, and I've seen it mature so much. You're getting a lot more people maybe studying at university or going straight into risk, which happens certainly less often in the past. So one other question that I've got, how do you feel the role of Chief Risk Officer will change over the next 10 to 20 years? It doesn't mean that it necessarily will change, but I'd be curious to see maybe how you envisage things might change in the next 10 to 20 years. Dimitri, I'd love to hear your thoughts first.
I think, as I said earlier, it's already evolved, certainly over the last 10 to 15 years, whereas market risk and counterparty risk were a key focus for people for a number of years. ERM in risk terms is relatively new. 3 lines of defence was something wasn't spoken about 10, 20 years ago. It's still new to many outside of finance. So I think the role of the CRO is going to continue to broaden. We will see, regulatory risk, as I mentioned earlier, is a key risk, certainly in the finance industry, and I know in others. I also think climate risk, interestingly, is one, and environmental is one that's come up over the last couple of years. Not something I would necessarily have put into a risk box a few years ago, but it's on the radar for many regulators globally. I think just the involvement will be more on the operational and ERM side than market and counterparty, so non-financial risks, as we would call them. The financial risks are pretty much evolved, but the broadening of the ERM and non-financial risks, I think we're just going to see that continue to expand as we become better at managing and mitigating the risks in the risks that we already know. It's only then that you can see the ones that are blinded at the minute.
Perfect. That's some really good points there. And Maytap, what about your thoughts?
I think also it is very much evolving. I think in the next 10, 20 years, non-financial risks and its risk management, the risk management of non-financial risks will become more and more important. The recent COVID-19 crisis was a very good example. It was a bad, but the example of the new non-financial risks. The less traditional risk types is getting more and more important. And also the cybersecurity, because everything being digital at home, at work, and digitization, artificial intelligence, all this being a continuous change, the cybersecurity and cyber and digital risks will continue to increase. So definitely risk management professionals need to get familiar with these new risk types. And I think also yes, we have more risk analytics, we have more risk intelligence, we have big data, but we should continue to come up with proactive risk insights for the business. And I think another challenge that will continue is the regulatory mandates, the regulatory requests increasing in complexity and in pace. every country. This is an important change that I think it will continue. I would like to say that it's a golden age from a risk management importance perspective. Risk management was always needed before, during, and after the financial crisis. Now we know that it is important during any type of crisis, be it business continuity, operational resiliency, financial or health crisis. So I think an area where every company knows the importance of risk management. So really, this will continue, in my opinion.
I love the fact that it's a golden age in risk management. It's an exciting time and obviously constantly evolving. And nice to see the continual trend of non-financial risk between the two of you mentioned. So Alex, what are your thoughts in terms of how the role of Chief Risk Officer will change in the next 10 to 20 years?
I do agree about the non-financial. I think it will just be more multifaceted. I'll pull out a few ideas around that. But first, I think the key for me is I feel it's going to be more of an executive role that happens to lead a risk function than a risk leader who happens to be an executive. So I think more business acumen probably going forward. I know we've talked a lot about regulation, but the business is going to want more value out of this role if it's at the top table. So I think that's going to be a pressure for, I guess, more understanding of the business and finding solutions rather than, just here's another regulation. I agree with everything you said about risk and data analytics. I think not just quantification and models, but not crunching information to bring insights, I think is certainly my team's. We're doing a lot of work with Power BI, but it's not necessarily on model output. It's just on everything, trying to get to the bottom of what the data is telling us. I think reputation and people risk. So everything to do with the environment we talked about, but very broadly ESG. So diversity, governance standards, supply chain, integrity. I can't even imagine what it'll be, but it'll be the equivalent of human rights in your outsourcing platforms, but whatever people will invent as the latest area of to hold people to account on. And lastly, I think let's not forget the soft issues. So really about accountability and behaviors. Because I see that there's a lot of focus on numbers, but at the end of the day, people make decisions, and are they going to take accountability for those decisions?
Right, that's some really interesting answers here. Again, common themes, but it'll be interesting to see how risk evolves. It'll be last year, 12 months ago, I don't think COVID or sort of the pandemic was high on the top sort of 5 risks that was coming up and being discussed. So it'd be really interesting. And just on a human level, if I could ask one other question to you all, starting with Mehtap, if you can let me know or discuss what actually it is that you enjoy most about being a Chief Risk Officer, or what points it is that you enjoy most about being a Chief Risk Officer. Would you be happy to share that with us?
Sure. I think in my case, it was really this passion for learning and learning always new things, and to learn how to learn and become even an expert on something that you didn't know before. I applied the risk management, like the things that I learned in the discipline, to other things that I have done. And I think a good risk manager needs to read well, to listen to the others, ask the right questions, and then to digest all the information and to come up with something tangible. So I love this part, and I applied even to my hobbies, etc., which I found great and fascinating. It has been never a dull moment, and I love being continuously challenged myself on an intellectual level. So this is the part that I like the most.
That's great. It sounds like it's obviously a really interesting role. Alex, how about you? What is it that you enjoy most, or the points you enjoy most about being a Chief Risk Officer?
Well, the funny thing is, it takes me back to my engineering, because I enjoyed studying, analyzing physical processes and systems, and now I study and analyze business processes and systems. And I think the logic and the questions you apply are the same, but you can actually work with your colleagues to understand how to make those business processes and systems better. So I think it's really about that nosiness, I guess. That's what it started with, that, and I'll finish with that.
Nosiness is good. And Demetria, what about you? What have you enjoyed most about being a Chief Risk Officer from a human level?
I think no day is the same as the previous one, or it won't be the same as tomorrow's day. No one day is the same as the next, and that excites me. I don't know when I wake up in the morning what's going to hit me. COVID's a good example of that, but it happens on a smaller level. Every day you might think you're going down one path, but something comes left field, and you have to deal with that day, and everything else gets pushed behind. That's what excites me most. The other thing that I do enjoy is, and Alex touched on it, risk culture is becoming more and more important. And so the education of your peers and the people you work with around the importance of risk management, that it's not a blockade to doing business, it's an enabler to doing business, ensuring people know how to use risk to build out the business, I think is important. So educating your colleagues and your peers is important to me as well.
That's great. There's so many interesting things which I've heard and discussed today. It's again, similar themes, but actually sort of slightly different views and takes. So that's great. So I guess just as a wrap-up question, if I could ask each of you, if there's one thing that you said you've taken from today that you'd be happy or keen to emphasise to share with others. I know it's hard to limit it just to one thing, but what one thing would you recommend to, or would you want to share with others that you've taken away from what we've discussed today? Starting back with Demetria, actually.
It's very hard to condense into one thing, but for me, I think as the role of the CRO is evolving, communication is probably the one word that I would pull out of today.
Perfect, thank you. Meta?
I think I've done, including communication, but covering more broadly, I would say continuous learning, continuous intellectual curiosity, and acting outside your risk comfort zones, being able to challenge yourself so that you can challenge the business and add value.
Great, thank you. And Alex?
I think it's all been said, but I think it's really that threat and opportunity mindset. So trying to help the business be successful, not just avoiding bad things. Great.
Look, thank you so much for all your time. I know you're all busy people, so really value this. And I think everyone who's watching hopefully will share some nice positive comments. I've really enjoyed sharing this with the audience. So thank you again for all your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Okay, so that's we don't need to log off now if you don't want to. But everyone happy with that? I think it went really well.
Yeah. Great.
I'll send a recording afterwards. I'll send it today just so you've got a copy of it, soft copy. We'll get the nicer looking sort of copy over the next 2 weeks. It'll be released Risk Awareness Week, 14th of October, so that's a week on Wednesday. But yeah, and I'll share it with you all as well. So again, thank you so much. If you want to discuss anything else, just come back to me afterwards. But yeah, really interesting points. Thank you.
Thank you.
No problem. Take care.
Yeah, have a good day. Bye.